Hello, and welcome to the Systematic Understanding of Everything, an Exalted podcast. This show is a collaborative effort between members of the Story Told, Bonus Experience, and Mage the Podcast. We're going to break down the basics of Exalted, from its rules to its setting. I'm Chazz, Exalted writer and fan.
And I'm Monica, Exalted 3rd Edition supplement developer and lead mechanical developer for Exalted Essence. This is episode 3, Imminent Solar Glory, where we're going to take a deeper look at the Solar Exalted, the champions of the Unconquered Sun. We're going to tag Terry in for this episode, and he's going to ask us questions, and we're going to answer them. Terry will be our stand-in for new people who are listening to the show, because Terry is also a new person.
I am. I have worked very hard not to learn anything about this game, and it's been absolutely fascinating. I'm like the small kid who sees like a TV commercial for something and is super excited about it despite knowing nothing about it.
And that's why you bought the entire library of Exalted books?
Hey, buddy, I didn't come here to be attacked.
Today we're going to break down who are the Solar Exalted. The Solar Exalted are traditionally the core book Exalt, so are most players' first exposure to playing an Exalted character.
I know the Solar Exalted as being very good at kicking people, among other things. Where do the Solar Exalts get their power from?
The Solar Exalted are the chosen of the Unconquered Sun, who is the greatest of the gods, who oversees the celestial bureaucracy.
What drives the Unconquered Sun to choose his champions? Is it a he-him thing? Do gods have genders in this game?
Yeah, the gods have genders.
Okay.
In Exalted, lots of things have genders that you would think might not have gender, and then some other things don't have gender that you might think have gender. So gender's fake, and creation embraces that.
Okay, cool.
The Unconquered Sun picks mortals who exhibit heroism against impossible odds. And I can give some examples here from players in my recent Solar game. So this can be kind of classical physical heroism. My Zenith cast in my game dove into the canals of Nexus to save his son from a fearsome river dragon, and so was exalted by the Unconquered Sun in that moment. However, like we talked about in episode 1, Exalted is not just a game about physical awesomeness. I had one player in the same game who set his exaltation at the moment of signing an impossible deal between the realm, the guild, and a small town that was win-win-win, but ultimately protected the town from the exploitation by putting these greater powers in counterbalance. And he exalted as an eclipse cast. So the type of heroism is often tied to the type of Solar Exalted one becomes, and it can have a huge range.
So we're gonna talk about our characters' exaltations now, because I got some.
Yes.
Yeah. Probably my favorite of my characters' exaltation stories, which I don't always do often, but perhaps I should do more of. But like one of the ones that I really thought about is one of my Zeniths, which is the cast I like to play the most. So one of my Zeniths is a broad category. She exalted from a feat of moral integrity as opposed to like classic physical heroism or like a great social feat. Her backstory was that she was a mortal immaculate monk and a wild hunter who had her revelation from the sun that killing others for their exaltation was wrong, and was like, it was an explosive moment of like, God says don't do this anymore, thrown off her horse, St. Paul style, and exalted as a priest of the sun right then and there. Story of the particular St. Paul I am thinking of was like the hagiography or whatever. It has to do with him formerly being a dude called Saul who persecuted Christians during the Roman Empire and had a like literal revelation from God who was like, quit doing this, that's wrong, and was flung off his horse and blinded for a short period of time and repented and then became a very holy man. So I was like, that idea of like God being like, quit doing that, bam, I thought was really cool, and I sort of spun a version of it into this character's backstory.
Why wouldn't the sun do that to everyone then?
Why wouldn't he just be like, quit it, bang?
Yeah, exactly. Why would he be like, stop murking my bitches?
I assume because he has other things to do.
Okay, got it. He had a free Tuesday, and that's where he went with it. Okay, that makes sense.
It's pretty clear that the Unconquered Sun doesn't just, like, constantly micromanage or pay attention to creation. The gods aren't, like, omnipotent or anything.
Yeah, because otherwise, instead of being the Unconquered Sun, it would be the Insufferable Sun, which I
Right.
don't think is a game that anyone wants to play.
There is another aspect in the setting as well where each act of exaltation diminishes the god's power in a small way. And so there is this idea that very powerful gods can empower many exalted, but it does come with a price. And so they may be circumspect about choosing their champions.
You had mentioned before that 3rd edition is set at the return of the Solar Exalted. Where did they go, and how did they come back?
Last episode, we mentioned the usurpation, where the far more numerous dragon-blooded rebelled against solar tyranny at the end of the First Age. So let's zoom in and examine that a little bit closer.
The Sidereals are really behind the usurpation and backing the Dragonblood doing it. They kind of have a Doctor Strange in Endgame moment where they cast into fate to see how they can do it, and there's only one possible solution, and that is killing all of them and overthrowing them. So they do. The 2nd edition over-explained it, I think. I think it's better if it's sort of an interesting mystery, but they get the Dragon-blooded to overthrow them because there's more Dragon-blooded than everybody else, and they successfully put a stop to solar exaltations continuing to happen. Chazz has this noted as some mechanism. Also, this is also something that 2nd edition, I think, over-explained, which I think is also better in 3rd edition without being very specific, but they used some sort of strange technology or arcane magic to prevent exaltations from continuing to happen, and then, like you do with anything powerful and mythical, they created a little prison for them called the Jade Prison, and then they hid it away forever, and just like anything that's hidden away forever will never come back, right?
Exactly. In previous editions, the Jade Prison was in the ocean, but that is much less defined now as presented in the 3rd edition core book.
So to clarify one thing. One, the Jade Prison is just like Arkham Asylum. No one ever breaks out of it. 2, you mentioned souls. I don't know. So this is a world then where reincarnation occurs, or is it just the spark of exaltation?
Yes.
Both.
Yes.
Separately.
Yes.
For the Solar Exalted, those souls get recycled. This is part of how the Unconquered Sun can get around that diminishment, where past solar heroes, their exalted sparks can be reused to empower new heroes. And that kind of gives one of the cool aspects of Exalted, where you can have flashes of memory or dreams from your previous incarnations, though that shouldn't dominate your story.
As these solars were dying, instead of the spark going back, they were being collected by someone else in a big old soul jar, and then the soul jar broke.
Something caused the soul jar to break recently, which coincided with the disappearance of the Scarlet Empress, which made the solars come back. We don't know what caused the soul jar to break. Also, the soul jar is maybe more metaphysical this time around, as opposed to last time, where I think it literally was a soul jar that they sunk to the bottom of the ocean, which is already kind of cool, but you would think someone would have found it before now.
That removed the Solar Exalted kind of from the playing field of creation for a millennia. And like Monica said, now they are returning. And that is where our game begins.
Are there types of Solar Exalted?
So every Exalt type has subtypes. So to really break this down, think of your Exalt type as being sort of like a class, but also like a race at the same time, like in classic D&D where dwarf was your class. Think of it like that. So if that's the case, each caste or aspect, we'll talk about that when we get to Dragonblooded, the subtypes are like choosing an archetype, like from Pathfinder, or a subclass, which I think is what they call them in 5e.
I don't know.
This is a really, really vast oversimplification, but I'm trying to speak in like lowest common denominator here. But for the purposes of this comparison, it does determine what skills you're good at and does grant you special features that should inform how you build your character. So on that surface level comparison, it's very much like that. Solars have 5. Each are named for a phase of the day or a position of the sun, and we'll give some very simplified breakdowns of what each of those are like.
The Dawncast are warriors, generals, war leaders, fighters. They are the fighter of the Solar Exalted.
Yeah, then you have Zeniths, which are my favorite, which are priests and demagogues and leaders and firebrands. They are clerics and paladins, if we want to continue with the D&D comparison.
The Twilight Cast are savants, scholars, artisans, and sorcerers. They're the wizard and artificer class if we want to keep up with that D&D metaphor.
Then we have knights, which are coincidentally my second favorite. They're assassins and criminals and spies and the stealthiest stealthy guys you could ever imagine. Both rogues and assassins, if we're continuing. We are continuing. The D&D comparison continues.
And then the Eclipse cast are negotiators, socialites, merchants, bureaucrats. They're the people. So I guess the closest you could get in D&D would be like a bard or any character who's really high charisma and is like, I'm just going to invest in charisma skills instead of my class abilities. But because Exalted has that broader framework of having a robust social system, it gives you a lot of really cool options to play into that aspect of the game. And I really enjoy the Eclipse cast. I think they're my second favorite.
Eclipse is where the metaphor falls apart. So yeah, those are the 5.
What are the basic forms of their powers? You talked about charms before. What flavors of super stuff do they get?
Boy, so they basically get all the stuff. They get their own native charms, a whole 2 big charm set. They also get martial arts, which are a very specific kind of codified charm set. They are also the best at mastering certain levels of martial arts. Chazz, you want to talk about sorcery?
Yes, the Solar Exalted are also the greatest sorcerers with access to all 3 tiers of power in their sorcery. And they are masters of evocations. They are resonant with all of the magic materials and have an easier time unlocking the greatest potential of the artifacts that they wield.
What does the sentence resonant with all magical materials mean?
So in creation, there are 5 or maybe more magical materials that are used to create artifacts of power. Different Exalted have different ability to wield particular materials that are in line with their themes. As kind of the god kings of creation, the Solar Exalted are able to master all of the types of magical materials.
From a strictly mechanical standpoint, when you take the artifact background, they're called merits in 3rd edition, but you are also familiar with other White Wolf products, so it's the same thing. When you take that, you get cool weapon or item or something, often a weapon or a suit of armor, but it doesn't have to be. And then, of course, it is made of something. And the term magical material is quite literal. There are 5, possibly more, that are like the key ones, and you get this through that background. You commit a certain amount of your power to it, and then you unlock special charms, which are what evocations are. And some are basically like locked behind being magically resonant with whatever substance that artifact is made from. And so mechanically, if they are resonant with all magical materials, it means that there are very few special charms from artifacts that are off limits to them.
So based on your description, they're awesome at everything all the time. Is there anything they suck at?
There's some things that they can't, that are off limits and that they can't do, but they don't suck at anything. That's sort of the point.
Okay, got it.
They can't shapeshift, for example.
Mostly.
Okay.
Yeah. Solar charms as a whole kind of focus on excellence in the skills that they already master and pushing that excellence to supernatural heights.
So what powers those powers?
All right, so this is a perfect place to now break down how Exalted powers work. We'll probably do a deep dive later on like charms and what they do, but as an overview, Exalts channel their natural power, which is called essence. Units of essence are motes, into discrete feats of like strength, of power, of skill, and those are called charms. I already brought up motes, but that's like the smallest unit of essence. Charms cost them, you have a pool of them, and they aren't necessarily diegetic. They're expressions of skill and ability. Like you don't necessarily be like, I know the charm Iron Whirlwind technique. That's not something your character is ever going to say. Your character might understand it as like, I know how to use my power to swing my sword more times than normal, in the same way that like an artist understands things like object source lighting or cross-hatching.
So it sounds, to do the D&D metaphor, it's one of those things where a wizard has to like super study to learn a thing, but maybe a priest spell just kind of manifests when their understanding increases.
Yeah, it's a little closer to the idea of like a priest spell coming to you naturally. I seem to recall that the priest spells being sort of divinely inspired as opposed to the result of hard work. Charms are kung fu in the sense that those words mean hard work.
Is there a downside to solars using their powers?
So there's no real direct downside to using any power. That said, there are potentially consequences, and there are consequences of having all of that power. So first up, we talked about motes of essence. If you use too much of it too fast, it ignites in the air around you, causing you to glow with power, causing a symbol of your caste to appear on your forehead, as usually called the caste mark. And so this makes it really obvious to anyone seeing you that you are one of the Solar Exalted, which can be a problem because the Dragon-Blooded and the Wild Hunt are out to get you. That is an ever-present threat in most areas of creation to the Solar Exalted.
That being said, having a cool glowing Super Saiyan aura is rad as hell.
It really is.
By all means, continue with your explanation. I just wanted to interject that very important point.
Exalted also experience a phenomena called essence fever, which drives them to action. It drives them to use their power. It's kind of a tingling in the back of their mind saying, you can change this, you can use your power, you are mighty, do something about it, but it drives them to act.
Yeah, this was something that was quite literally a offhanded mention in the first edition core book. Kind of ignored for all of second edition and brought back for third edition, and it was a thing that I thought it was really cool. They really kind of made it into a neat thing that affects all the Exalted and is present in every book so far. There's a really neat role play hook that I thoroughly enjoy.
Yeah, me too. I did not remember that from first edition, but I was excited to see it.
It's literally mentioned in one paragraph in the core book.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay. Finally, like most of the Exalted, the Solar Exalted suffer from the Great Curse.
As punishment for overthrowing the things that made the universe, all the Exalted are cursed. Turns out that the Solars are cursed the most. Be them most cursed. The Great Curse manifests as suddenly acting in extremes from your normal, which for most Exalts is already extreme, behavior. A really good example of this is when Hercules goes apeshit and kills his family in his myth, which I think Hera provokes him into doing.
Yeah.
That's something triggering you or or provoking you into acting with berserk rage or things like that. And there's a whole list of bad options to choose from.
Yeah, this is something that I saw a lot when I was running first edition Exalted, and has not come up in my games a lot since. And it created some really dramatic moments in the campaign that are really memorable even over a decade later. They creates that, do you remember when my Exalted suffered limit break, and that's really fun to reminisce about the game that way.
Can you give an example?
So one of the Exalted in that group, the Zenith, her limit trigger was not being able to make the world better for those she cared about. And she discovered that her brother had run off to go challenge a corrupted fire dragon to a duel. And she was going to try to get everyone together to go deal with this problem as a group so that he wouldn't have to face the threat alone. And he ran off anyway. So she went to the volcano where this occurred, and there had been an eruption, so it was a lava field, and she saw his broken sword sticking out of the cooled lava. That happened to be enough to be the moment when her limit trigger hit. That drove her into several days of introspection, where she essentially said, my character's not really active during this time, and it worked because it was like a travel time or a downtime, but it was a really dramatic moment where she was essentially scribbling in her journal and writing on any surface that was in contact, trying to figure out how she could have done this better. And it was just a powerful character moment for everyone in the game that we all remember.
So I decided to go hunt down what I thought was the reference to Essence Fever, and I'm wrong, actually. It was a thing called Irritated Essence, which is a one-off mention in the core book that's actually bad. So it's not quite the same thing. That might be new for third edition. Irritated Essence has no qualms about using hapless Exalted as the medium for its fulfillment. The outcome of an experience of this type depends a great deal on the type of Exalted involved. Solar Exalted are prone to megalomania, condescending vanity, and destructive rage. It really sort of sounds like they rolled that into the Great Curse from there on out.
Yeah, well, and that's something else that I saw a lot in that same game, is that the Great Curse in the fiction doesn't just manifest as these moments of limit break, but also manifests as kind of an overall hubris and megalomania. And that all happened in my game too. As the Solar Exalted got up into higher essence, they kind of stepped away from being mortal. And there was this one character who decided to tattoo his leg with a saga and then skin it to leave it somewhere, which was kind of gruesome. But so I wanted to know what was motivating him. And he said, I did it because I could survive it. I'm powerful enough that I can do this thing. And it was really interesting to see kind of the way that the Great Curse manifests affecting the players as well, almost not even intentionally.
That is cool and very intensely weird flex, but okay. I mean, it's fun to realize that that's sort of happened, that your character has taken a departure from mortality, especially as you get stronger and your charms become more powerful. It's also very interesting to see this take shape in like mixed play, because I played a lot of mixed play games in 2nd edition. So you would also see that Dragon-Blooded with slightly weaker charm sets would not quite succumb to the same sort of like, well, I'll just take all the skin off my own leg and make it into a book. That's cool. In the same way.
Yep, it was an odd moment.
You've outlined that there are these Solars running around winning at everything all the time, and people periodically try and stop them, and they fail because of how awesome the Solars are. Do the Solars have, like, political factions or ideologies, or are they all kind of just doing their own thing?
Well, they've been gone for a really long time, which makes the answer sort of not really. But the interesting thing about that is that this is a space where you, as the player, can start building your own ideological factions or political stances and whatnot, and use that to make a mark on the version of creation that's present in your campaign. We did talk about how eclipses don't line up nicely with any D&D class, and that's because, you know, they're also the people who are actually quite good at establishing a political or ideological faction for the group.
And I think the Zenith do that quite well also.
Yeah, if you have two of them, nobody's stopping you.
Who opposes the Solars?
Well, we mentioned the Wild Hunt earlier, and the Wild Hunt is driven by the Immaculate Order, which is the primary religion of the realm, and one of their core tenets is opposition to the anathema, which includes the Solar Exalted. Even beyond the realm, most other dragon-blooded societies follow some form of the Immaculate philosophy. The biggest issue here is that, from a Solar perspective, mortals are going to fear you. Even ones who aren't devout Immaculate followers often fear the signs of anathema and signs of solar power, and so will reach out to the Dragon-Blooded, to the Immaculate Order, who organize the Wild Hunt to come and hunt down the nascent Solars before they gather too much power.
The Immaculate Order and the Wild Hunt are made up almost entirely of Dragon-Blooded, and then I also mentioned that there's mortals involved too, as I use that as a backstory for one of my characters mentioned previously in the episode. This institution of the Wild Hunt are organized groups of monks and other Dragon-Blooded soldiers, sometimes even glory seekers, who hunt down the anathema to capture or kill them. This creates a constant threat to newly Solar Exalted characters that should make them reluctant to reveal their power. It also means that storytellers kind of have that in their back pocket as like a stock threat. It is also I'm going to plug my own show here. It's also worthwhile to go listen to the bonus experience episode about queer games, where we talk about the major religious institution coming to kill your character for their identity as being a pretty powerful gay theme in Exalted. So you should go pause this episode, go listen to that episode, and come back.
Episode link will be in the show notes.
Thanks, Terry. The manipulators of this whole thing, the architects of this more or less religious organization, are the Sidereals, and the faction of Sidereals that support it are called the Bronze Faction. They were previously the people who organized the usurpation, and a bunch of them are still around, and they still hold senior positions among the Sidereals. They support the Immaculate Order, they support the Wild Hunt, they've kind of helped prop up the realm, and they are a potentially higher level threat that you could throw at your group of Solars.
Yeah, I think another great thing about Sidereals as an adversary is that they can orchestrate all kinds of other difficulties for your character, even if they don't appear themselves, because of their network of favors and allies that they could have cultivated over the centuries. Also, along with the returning solars, creation in the Age of Sorrows sees the debut of the Abyssal and Infernal Exalted, both of whom hold up dark mirrors to the solars. They face some of the same challenges as the newly returned solars in terms of standing against the status quo. With the backing of their patrons, the Death Lords or Yosis, they're often in opposition to your potentially heroic Solar Exalted.
If you paint abyssals or infernals with the black hat brush, you're not really doing it wrong. That's okay. You're allowed to make them bad guys. The other really cool thing about playing Exalted, though, just immediately dialing back the thing I said about it being fine to have bad guys, is that you can decide as the storyteller that anything is an antagonist. Even another Solar. It's your choice as the storyteller who acts in opposition to the player's characters. The game doesn't really designate anyone as specific bad guys, though, like I just said, it's kind of okay to beat up an Abyssal. One of the fun things about Exalted is that everyone is a little right and everyone is a little wrong, and that's the fun conflict, the emotional conflict of that.
I think another thing worth mentioning is that the Solar Exalted often are pitted against mortal institutions, like the Guild, which is a big exploitative merchant organization that derives most of its wealth from the slave trade, drugs, and mercenaries. So they're not really good guys for the most part. There's also all kinds of states across creation that may have tyrannical rulers or tyrannical systems, and it can be great to pit idealistic solars against their cultural environment.
You are absolutely right.
So who are the natural allies then of the solars, if anyone?
Well, we can start with potentially the Lunar Exalted. They are often bonded pairs. They use the word mate, which has always felt kind of creepy to me. They're bonded pairs with the Solars. They were often in partnerships or marriages or, business arrangements, whatever. They go together. The sun and the moon. It's very romantic, and I like it very much. So you have potentially Lunars who were wronged by the Solars in the past, so, they're also not super thrilled to see them back. I think 3rd edition has dialed back some of the Solars were great, but also awful. Here's a whole bunch of examples of abuse. Woo! From 2nd edition.
Yeah. Another potential ally, although this is an ally you have to watch, is the Sidarials of the Gold faction. Not all Sidarials supported the usurpation, and there is a emerging faction among them who want to back the newly returned Solars, but also guide them. And so it's an interesting balance of support and control.
In the same vein as Gold faction Sidarials who would like to control and guide new Solars, you might also have gods who approach it in the same way. They might want a Solar alliance for their raw power, or the influence that they might hold, or the influence that they might build. It's a pretty smart idea for a god to pitch their lot in with a Solar and benefit from their hard work.
And that can really apply to almost anyone seeking the advantage of the power of the newly returned Solar Exalted. Anyone could be an ally, just like anyone could be an enemy, but in the complex stage of creation's power, the Solar Exalted are a star, rising star, and anyone could benefit from that kind of an ally.
I think, springboarding off of your previous statement that mortal institutions can be a Solar enemy, similarly, a mortal institution can be a potential ally because everyone wants to hitch their wagon to that rising star. Let me make a Malaphor there. And again, like before, the cool thing about playing Exalted is that you can decide that anything is an ally. Heck, the Wild Hunt could be an ally in your campaign. Maybe the Wild Hunt and this the circle of new Solars have to team up temporarily to stop a much greater evil, as it were. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, after all, and that makes for really interesting stories.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in with another. Let's talk about our game's story here.
Sure.
In the same Solar Exalted game that I was talking about, the Children of Venif sought out the Circle of Solar Exalted, essentially pitching, look, we're in a bad position in the realm, and we think we could benefit from your aid in tipping the scales of power. So you can really bring in really any other faction to the Solar Exalted, even ones that normally seem opposed.
Are there any well-known or signature Solars that we get in any of the books, or that we follow their adventures as part of the in-world fiction?
Oh boy, aren't there. Exalted has tons of signature characters. However, with the recent return, Solars are the least established, as we mentioned when we were talking about ideologies. This leaves room for PCs to take the leading Solar roles in shaping creation, which is part of what's unique to the Solar experience. That said, the Bull of the North and his circle are probably the best established Solars in their impact to modern creation, but there's a number of characters that are introduced throughout the setting that can play interesting roles in your games. First and second edition also had a set of signature characters and alternates who appeared in the first edition cast books that are pretty well known and depicted throughout the art.
Can I share a spicy take, which is my take as a fan, not as an author, which is that I do not like any of the canon Solars 201.
Why is that?
I just find them kind of really boring. They're kind of uninspired and unmemorable. Like, I couldn't tell you anything about them. But this isn't the Monica snobby about canon characters episode, because that can just be bonus content. we should just talk about who they are instead.
Sure. So probably the very first one that a lot of Exalted fans will know is Harmonious Jade, who appeared on the cover of first edition and on second edition. She's a knight caste raised by an assassin demon cult in the south, and she fled east where she plies her deadly trade. She also got to be the protagonist character of one of the second edition Exalted novels, and she appears all over the art.
I also think it's really important to note, since the person listening to this may very well have never seen any art of Harmonious Jade, is that Jade is a black woman, which is a pretty big deal to have a black woman prominently featured on the cover of a book in 2001. I also think she's bi too, but maybe I made that up.
I don't recall anything about her sexuality, but I could see that. And she's a badass.
She's always depicted seemingly with two arrows, which I assume is a metaphor, so I'm going to assume you're right, Monica.
I feel like I got that from the one comic where, what's her name, Haisha Black Asp is flirting with her, and she seems kind of into it, but I may have just made that up.
Oh, she also appears with Lunar in the new Lunar book, so I think you may be onto something there.
I believe the Lunar she's with in Lunar's book is Haisha Black Asp, and I think they're supposed to be implied to be mates, so maybe I didn't make that up.
Okay.
I did lie. There are two signature or canon Solar characters that I do like. Mirror Flag and Ophelia Cess, they have rights, nobody else. Mirror Flag is, I think she's an Eclipse. Mirror Flag reappears. They really should be using they, them pronouns, as they're like a master of disguise. They're a trickster. They used to have like a cool artifact mask that let them totally conceal their identity. No one knows who Mirror Flag really is. Mirror Flag might be a lot of people, and Mirror Flag has certainly built their legend around being someone you can't identify. And then Ophelia Cess is a knight caste, and he is a snake man and a merchant, and that's why I like him.
Excellent. Third edition introduced 5 new signature characters to represent the cast in the art. And I kind of like this new set of characters. They feel a little more nuanced than the previous edition ones. Do you have any particular favorites from the new batch?
I think mine has to go to Prince Diamond, who is on the cover, who's the Eclipse of the new circle. He's on the cover of Exalted 3rd edition, which, like Jade, is really damn important because he's a trans man, which is a similarly powerful statement in 2015, 16? When did the Exalted 3rd edition core book come out? I feel like it had the same statement that putting a black woman on the cover in 2001 was. But also, like the original set, I don't remember that many details about them besides their names and general look, and that Prince Diamond is trans, and that's awesome.
Well, the other one that I wanted to call out was Novia Claro, again, the Night Cast. She is a fixer for hire in Nexus. In the Dragon-Blooded book, she battles Naman in Giara in one of the chapter openings, which was pretty cool. And she was also the primary protagonist of False Images, which was one of the Exalted 3rd edition novellas, which I happen to greatly enjoy. So that is why I remember anything about Novia Claro.
So who should play a Solar Exalted?
So, as we've said before, Exalted is a game about what you do with all this power you have, and that is even more true for the Solar Exalted.
Yeah, I would argue that it is, in fact, their key theme. No one man should have all this power, and that's sort of the theme. I've also jokingly said that that Solars are the easiest Exalt type to convert your favorite D&D character to if you are going to pick up Exalted for the first time.
Yeah, that is true. Speaking to the power question, this kind of carries on from their exaltation. They exalt in a moment of heroism, and that usually drives them to succeed at whatever they were doing in that moment. And that can also make them a force for change in creation. Because they have all of this power, they may choose to do something with it to change something about their homeland, or to build their own little empire, or to overthrow a villain. And that is a big part of the solar experience. What do you do now that you can?
The other thing that you can do with a solar concept is work together or hang alone. Solar concepts work either way. Solars rely on their circle because they have no built-in support from creation. They have whatever community they may have come from, but even then that may have shunned you because you're anathema now. They don't have backing the way the realm backs the dragon-blooded, or the way the Silver Pact backs the Lunars, or the way the factions of heaven back sidereals, and so on and so forth. Pretty much everyone but them have someone to help them. You can kind of play a lone wolf character type if you want to, though I, as a fan and a person who runs lots of games, will tell you not to, because those kind of character concepts can be very disruptive. But that doesn't mean it's not a character type that's forbidden or even inspiring.
I'm going to take an aside here and say that the lone wolf character concept works as long as the player can commit to being a part of the group while being a lone wolf, because you can play an interesting lone wolf character who sits on the outskirts of the group and part of their story is being drawn in without being a dick about it.
Yes, Chazz is absolutely right. And solar character types support playing that kind of character. But, maybe the real heroes were the friends we made along the way.
That's my line. I was going to say the real usurpation of the friends we made along the way. The important part about it is it can't make sense. So you've talked about that they don't have institutions or set roles or anything. So what are some character concepts you could play then as a solar?
I had a Nightcast concept who was... So in second edition, the craft mechanics were silly, to say the least. But you took craft skill, and the skill, the sub-skill was based on an element, and then it covered a whole bunch of things. So she was all craft water-based, which meant that she was both really good at cooking and also good at poison, because clearly that's the same thing. So I played a poisoner who had a long needle-like sword, was very stealthy, and the whole thing was establish stealth, poison guys disappear. And then, of course, being immune to those poisons, too, so I could do the whole... I've built up a tolerance to poison this whole time. Both drinks... The Princess Bride scene.
Inconceivable.
So I could do that, too, which was really fun. So the idea of, being a stealthy character with a cool, skinny, poisoned blade and making my own materials was something I definitely enjoyed doing and probably would try to do in Essence, too.
That sounds fun. At the time second edition was released, I really liked the elemental craft system because it reminded me of Final Fantasy XI, where various crafts used different elemental crystals that were some way thematically linked. And the crystal could be used for a variety of things. So, for example, you could use a fire crystal if you were making something out of metal, but also if you were baking a cake. And so the second edition elemental craft system reminded me of that. And I was like, oh, that's neat. But yes, silly.
Yes, it's very charming, but silly.
I, on the other hand, have never had the opportunity to play a solar. I've had a number of them knocking around in my head for a while now, but kind of the one that was sparked as some inspiration since the beta for 3rd edition is a Nightcast bounty hunter intent on serving justice. So rather than being a criminal or an assassin, this is someone who kind of wraps himself in that mantle to bringing out the sun's justice. I think the character could work in most areas of creation, probably wields a bow, but I'd probably switch that to a flame piece if we're talking about a game in the South, because that's thematically cool. I'd probably look at awareness, investigation, larceny, and stealth charms. Also, I realized after working on this outline and picking the Nightcast from both 1st and 2nd edition, 3rd edition, and then for my own character, that that's probably my favorite cast among the Solars, which I don't think I would have been able to tell you before this exercise.
I also played a fire wand using righteous devil stylist Zenith, who is all about, like, imagine taking a, like, lawman type Weird West Annie-Get Your Gun character, making them a priest of the sun, giving them a rifle that shoots fire, and a, like, no-nonsense attitude. That character was a lot of fun, too. Did I totally describe my like, leather armor as being Duster-like? Yes, absolutely.
Terry, after listening to
Mandatory.
us ramble on about the Solar Exalted, what would you be inspired to play?
So, to the audience, the agreement I have made is normally, if you've listened to me on Maids the Podcast, I do a lot about faking ignorance, where I will talk to a guest about a game. Like, when Chazz came on to talk about how to introduce Exalted into Mage, I literally read the 30 core rulebook. Here, I have done no such thing. This is entirely me listening to the conversation as has emerged and basing it off of that. So I have come up with the following character concept while Monica and Chazz were talking. The name of the character is Fifth Emanation of the Eternal Guildbreaker, and this is a person who goes around finding loopholes in guild contracts to get towns that have extractive industries in them out from under their thumb so that they're able to go higher up the value chain. Because, as I understand, this is a world of oppressive caste systems. What annoys me even more than that is rent-seeking as a phenomenon. And 3 charms I invented based strictly on the names I saw for other charms were Immaculate Discovery of Contradictory Clauses Prana, Flawless Synergistic Agreement Approach, and Let the Wookiee Win Tactic, where the fact that they were Solar Exalted, they just threatened to beat the shit out of someone.
My only note is not to use prana, because it literally means breath.
Oh, no, I did it specifically because it's nonsensical.
Okay, all right. It's supposed to be bad on purpose. All right.
Oh, yeah, this is a case where someone, like, just sits above the contract and goes,
Oh, it's
subsection 2, paragraph 6. It's
Okay,
literally
so
a breath.
Literally a breath. Okay,
Yes,
fine.
yeah.
Note rescinded. You could play that. That's a real character concept. That's literally a character you could play. Like,
Yeah. It sounds like that's Eclipse cast based on your description.
yeah, definitely.
Yep,
Okay.
that sounds like a pretty classic Eclipse.
Okay. Pretty glad you're like, oh, Terry, that character was in the 2E core rulebook. You're like, so the one thing you haven't really established is if someone just grabs this book and is like, I want to be a character who does cool shit when I sit down and play the game. I don't have to wait till level 10 or what have you. Are there any cool things that just a freshly made character can do that makes people go, that's cool?
Ooh, I have one.
Okay, you first.
My go-to for, like, what makes solars really cool, what sort of thing can I take right off the bat that makes you awesome, is Glorious Solar Saber, which lets you literally manifest a lightsaber in your fist out of your glowing anima. You're just like, there you go, here's my sword, it's made out of light, and I'm gonna cut you now.
I was going to mention a similar one, but it's the one that lets you shoot beams of sunlight out of your sword, or whatever other weapon you're
No,
using.
Blazing Solar Bolt.
Yes, that one. I also like some of the classics, like Graceful Crane Stance, that lets you balance on anything, so you can get that scene out of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, where they're battling on top of the bamboo.
Oh, yes, that's a really good one, too. There are a bunch of movement tricks like that you can take. Monkey Leap Technique lets you jump really far, and then it upgrades into an ability that lets you jump, like, over mountains and shit. There's a starting charm that lets you make a whole bunch of attacks, like a real badass. There's defense charms that let you turn away blows without any harm to come to you or your weapon. Like, all that stuff is in there, and they feel really awesome. And that's mostly starting level stuff.
And one of the cool things about the Solar Exalted in particular that we didn't really touch on earlier is that as one of the Solar Exalted, you pick one ability to be your supernal ability, and you then don't have to worry about meeting the prerequisites for your essence in charms in that ability. And to explain what that means is it means that you are not bounded by only being able to take starting level charms. You can get to the heights of power at character creation if you so choose in your expertise.
So that sounds like if I were playing D&D and I had like a mega wizard and I picked one school of magic where I could ignore the level requirement for spells that I wanted to learn.
Yes, that is
Yes.
essentially what it's like.
That's badass. Can I share my favorite?
Yes,
Sure.
of course.
Phantom Arrow technique allows you to use an intimacy to add damage to a arrow shot or to use it as an arrow. So the fact that in this game I can shoot someone with the fact that my parents liked my older sister more speaks to me on so many levels it is not even funny.
The idea of charms are also sort of bespoke. So just because it's called Phantom Arrow technique in the book doesn't mean that that's how your character thinks of it, or even how your character might describe using it.
Okay, do we have any final thoughts about the Solar Exalted?
If someone's interested in learning more about the Solar Exalted, what should they read or where should they go?
Well, as Monica mentioned at the top of the episode, the Solar Exalted are the core book Exalted. So if you are interested in checking out Exalted and checking out the Solar Exalted, you can't go wrong with the Exalted 3rd Edition core book.
Chazz is correct.
Circle gets the square. Okay. Monica, where can people find out what you're up to?
Since you've chosen me first, now Chazz will shoot me with the arrow of his intimacy towards Terry picked Monica first.
That sounds like a really weird euphemism.
Oh, it did. They can find me on the internet on Twitter. I am at Zenith Sun, tweeting all kinds of things there, topical and otherwise. And you can also listen to me talk about game design in a humorous manner with my good friend Ray on Bonus Experience, which is bxpcast.com or misdirectedmark.com/bonus experience.
You can find me on Twitter as at StoryToldChazz, and that's Chazz with 2 Z's. I am one of the founding hosts of the Story Told podcast, so you can find me over there at libsyn.com/thestorytold. Yeah, I think that's it.
Cool. Thanks for listening.
And until next time, may the unconquered sun smile upon your barbecue. I don't know what I'm doing.
I was waiting with deep anticipation as to what you were going to say next. I was like,
I couldn't live up to that, so just go with the non sequitur.
if you just say you, we would be fine, but I know Terry's not going to just end that with you. Smile upon your barbecue. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you for listening to Systematic Understanding of Everything, an Exalted podcast. Go to exaltcast.com to subscribe, see our show notes, or listen to our past episodes. We're available on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and Anchor.fm. If you have a question, shoot us an email at questions@exaltcast.com. If you'd like to support our show, please consider using the affiliate links in our show notes to make purchases on DriveThruRPG and theStorytellerVault.com. The opening theme is Return of the Solar Exalted, and the closing theme is the Sidereal Exalted Lesser But Safe from Fanfare for the Chosen by James Semple and is used with permission. In the meantime, exalt strong.